Alright, so as a sort of quasi-continuation of my immediately prior video, which is unlisted and sort of for Bangshield's eyes only unless he tells me otherwise, I figured in addition to the prior video talking about iterating on somebody else's build, specifically Worm, I figured that now would probably be a good time to talk about iterating on somebody else's build, specifically the Cockpit / Yongwang combination. So this is looking at the original build posted by PSYS7ORM on the Xbox exhibition. I don't know if it's the sort of thing where the people have posted beforehand or whatnot, but in any case, this is the one that I've seen for the most likes with both the Cockpit and the Yongwang that sort of fit the style of what I was trying to do, which is essentially a hit and run build with it. So this was made before the update, one of many, I might add, to the Cockpit's abilities, specifically how it calculates the bonus. So I basically took a look at this and felt like there were a few things that I could end up doing better. So I downloaded it and spent like a dozen hours looking at upgrading it. So to go through a very sort of high level of this original build and then take a look at the two builds I've made in the meantime, I actually made three, but I'd leave one because I didn't end up liking the end result. Like I said, this is the original. So it has the Cockpit, the Yongwang, and it uses as much energy as it can cram on it via the Apollo in order to boost as much of the Yongwang as you can on any of these builds, which is to say, as a result of the 15% extra damage for each unit of hardware, you can get a maximum bonus of about 100% or so via using all of the remaining energy on hardware, and the Cockpit allowing you to get an additional bonus currently up to 40%. Beforehand it's been 50, and I think it was even 30 at one point, but in any case they've tweaked the Cockpit quite a bit. But in any case, being able to also get the damage bonus off of the hardware of the boosters allows you to sort of double dip on the damage that you can get off of this thing. So as a result of being once again a ramming build, it has the use of obviously a pseudo wedge shape on the front, the shivs to sort of deflect damage as well as deflect builds that you might be coming across as sort of a continuation of this wedge shape, and then overall obviously has been made to look extremely sleek. So I don't know a good way to really show the damage on it because obviously the orb sort of sucks for it, and most of the other ones aren't like one-to-one examples as a result of being the builds in here. But in any case, can do a pretty severe amount of damage as a result of, like, I don't even know how the math gets done, but like 2.5 timesing the damage on the Yongwang. Something like that. Pretty straightforward in premise anyway. You're able to ram things. When I spoke to PSYS7ORM about it, they basically said that they explicitly had the sort of melee shape on the front of it because when they're able to land shots on people with the Yongwang, the weapon tends to do a good enough job of stripping most of the armor that they're then able to finish them off by just the cabin. So very much the plan there, and then obviously it has the cloak. But pretty straightforward. I mean, if you're looking to max out the energy on a Yongwang build, regardless of if it's the Cockpit or not, you're only playing with about 7 energy as a result of it being 9 to begin with the Yongwang. Then if you take another 4 to get boosters for the Cockpit, then you're only looking at 4 energy to play with, period. So that math is wrong. 3 energy to play with, period. So in this case, they chose to go with the Cheetah engine, a Carjack, I'm assuming they were running into a lot of instances where they're flipping, and the Chameleon. So the Chameleon is boosted by the Cheetah, and the Cheetah does give the cabin a significant speed increase. A couple of my concerns with the build were, as you can see on the side, or on the top here, well, I guess a little bit of both. The armor on the Hermes on the sides here were really more like aesthetic than functional. Like, you don't really have a whole lot of durability between these two pieces. And then the quote-unquote armor for the top is very literally just decor. So those aren't stopping any damage from whatsoever. So I was very worried about those getting stripped pretty early on. They are a little bit more protected from the front and back as a result of use of the wheels, of course. But then I was also worried about the durability of the Yongwang. And then this is, again, something that's changed since the rework of the perk. So what used to happen is you'd have a maximum bonus of 50%, and you get 13% from the Hermes rockets. So if you had 4 of those, you maxed out on the damage bonus. If you had anything less, you wouldn't. So I believe this one was sitting at about 42% between the 2 blues and the 2 purple rockets. So I figured, okay, if I can get 4 Hermes fitting on the build, then I can squeeze out a little bit extra damage bonus. Additionally, I can use the Chameleon Mark II to get additional time while invisible. If I manage to handle my driving okay, I can get rid of the carjack, and then at that point I can use either a reload booster or wall hack radar in order to acquire targets a little bit more readily. And then at the time, the Cockpit had a cabin speed of 105. So that meant that you could actually hit the speed cap of 120 kph with the hot red with its 13% bonus. So I figured I could run that instead of the Cheetah, even though it has more power and obviously the benefit of boosting the invisibility, by then putting on the other module I was talking about earlier. So between the reload booster and the wall hack radar, being able to slap both of those on. So quite a few upgrades there, quote unquote upgrades. The other potential limitation, which will be a lot easier to show if I just download it. Ignoring the errors, which is just it talking about me basically not having decored parts. So nothing too terribly important functionality wise. Is that underneath the entire build is held together by this 2x4 frame. Which especially as a lightweight is rather worrying. Reason being because the footprint of the cockpit cabin is that. So it's basically a 5x6 but shifted by 1. So if you try and have the Apollo on there, it basically like cuts off everything, a large part of it in any case. So what they ended up doing was shifting the generator back 1, and then having everything connected to the frame. But as a result, if it gets blown off, it's gone. Normally what I like doing is having the generator in a place where the front frames attached to the front wheels and the back frames attached to the back wheels, but that's really not feasible if you do end up using the Apollo generator on this build, because on top of there really being no other place to put the generator just due to its size and shape. But you don't have enough space on it to slap a generator underneath and then have frames on the front and back. And that was kind of the biggest limitation in my eyes, is just being extremely contingent on not having that one frame popped, and basically like that's your entire build gone if it does get hit. So I was very worried about getting hit by fire and stuff like that. So the build I ended up having before the rework for it was this guy, the one I named the PSYS Storm Bomber. So I had done a couple of different, oh that sucks, I think I forgot to re-add the decor to it when I, what? It says 25 here and then 21 here. Oh, because I didn't get both. Alright, so looking at differences between the two different builds, like I said, this was my attempt at pretty much adding everything I just mentioned. So I beefed up the armor around the Yangwang. I ended up changing the wedge shape a bit because I was trying to do primarily deflection with it rather than actually dealing ram damage directly. I added the additional 2 Hermes boosters. I did originally play with the idea of having the 2 at the back, sort of like with the original build, but as a result of the Hermes being wider than the cockpit, I ended up with like a huge bulbous, like detachable butt where the boosters were, and I didn't really like the look of that because not only did it like, well, look terrible, but it took up a lot of space and it took up a lot of mass trying to armor it on all sides, and then it also shifted the center of gravity quite a bit. So I ended up deleting some of the side frames and tucking the Hermes in as tight as I could. As a result, although it might not be super obvious, these blocks, the blades, the rebar, whatever you want to call it, on the shiv wheels. Those don't actually block shots, so while they do have the melee damage reduction overall and those deal damage, they don't actually block projectile damage. So if you're shot from the front, the Hermes can actually still take damage through these spikes, which is a obvious limitation. And then as a result of me being really focused on having the Hermes tucked in as tight as possible and me removing those side frames, I ended up squishing the entire center of the build and then going with the gas gen instead of the Apollo. So I did lose an energy point there, but otherwise the other upgrades kind of went as planned. So I upgraded the Chameleon Mark 1 to the Chameleon Mark 2. I obviously swapped out the Hermes. And then I had played around with doing the reload booster and doing the wall hack radar, as you can see. Neither of those ended up making it into the final version that was posted on the exhibition, because I felt like the Cheetah's extra bonus speed was actually ended up being really useful. The bonus power for accelerating ended up being really useful, which is in line with what PSYS7ORM said. And then again, sort of finagling and getting all the stuff fitting underneath. So I ended up making this a little bit more PvP oriented of a build, where obviously you have the fuel as well, and it's sort of a make or break build. Definitely a lot more risky to run as a result of the increased amount of explosives and decreased durability on the generator, but I think could potentially end up performing a little bit better due to having the longer cloak and then potentially being able to swap out modules with the wall hack radar. So yeah, this is something that I played around with a lot, trying to get the armor sort of working, but in like a more bulky form, instead of having more of the decor pieces, having the heavier parts and just having less of the armor overall, using fewer larger parts as a result of that, and then trying to, of course, do frame shenanigans. As a result, I ended up with a lot of the thin frames still, but had redundancy built in, so the gist being if any single frame was destroyed, very little was actually lost on the build. Whereas, like I said earlier, there was, if that one frame was gone, so was the entire build. And then they also only had the, likewise, the 2 frames, the one wrapping around on either side. So obviously, if both of those pop, it's over. But with running the gas gen, I mean, it's extremely unlikely that's going to happen before the gas gen blows up, in which case your build is destroyed anyway. But it really was the sort of thing where I felt like there were a lot of upgrades I could make to PSYS7ORM's build, and then I ended up trying them out and actually going and doing them, and I found out, oh wow, it's actually really hard and difficult to actually make those changes like I had originally anticipated. So I can see why they didn't do them, or maybe they tried it and I'm just compromising with the solution they ended up doing anyway. And I mean, I had hoped to fuse the cockpit, but I haven't had the opportunity to get any good fusions with it. But again, I had to rework the entire build another time, so that point is a bit moot. Something notable that I kept struggling with quite a few times because I was so desperate for it to work, but it didn't, is one of the changes I wanted to make was moving the Yongwang back 1 pip in order to tighten it up quite a bit. Especially since the side armor pieces here have enough room for a length of 9 currently, but can be 8 if I squish it back, and then I have room to do all that. But the Yongwang, despite its look at apparently not really colliding with the cockpit a whole lot, it doesn't let you place it that 1 pip back. So that really sucked, especially mostly just because it's, a 9 long gun, and putting power of 2 armor rounds it inevitably leads to parts sticking out. But sort of a, do what you can, the best with what you can work with. So after the rework, where you didn't end up needing the 4 Hermes, we kind of go back to where PSYS7ORM's bomber is, again, a little bit more viable, sort of my changes to it are a little less viable, because now we're back to the part where using the cheetah is needed to hit the speed cap, and then using the 2 blue boosters is fine for also hitting the damage cap. So you can go back to hitting the max, which in this case is now 40% instead of 50. with it. So most of the changes I ended up making were kind of just thrown out the window, because it's like, well, there's no point in running the hot red if you want max speed, because I need the cheetah, and the cheetah also boosts the cloak, and it was, yeah, just a mess. So not to say I'm 100% happy with how that ended up, but it'd be how it do. The one benefit, I guess you could say, from it is you don't actually need 4 boosters again, rather. You only need the 2 Hermes and then the singular blast off, since it's 30 plus 10%. So as a result, I was able to add another energy of something else instead, which I did end up finally using the wallhack radar for. Again, theoretically, I could swap out the cheetah for a reload booster, but for like a hit and run, I don't feel like the 20% bonus you get is worth losing the additional acceleration as well as the additional recharge for the chameleon as a result of the cheetah's perk. So once again, sort of reworked the armor as a result of after reworking all the frames on everything. So you can kind of see I tucked the wheels a little bit closer together. I didn't stagger them anymore because I felt like I didn't really need to, since the boosters on the side are now fully quote-unquote protected / blocked angles from the wheels. And as far as the framework, I spent a bunch of time poking around with that as well, and that's mostly due to, again, me tightening the wheels and not like having them staggered. I didn't really need as many redundant parts. So what I ended up doing is widening the base again on the inside, pushing out all the wheels, and then allowing me to use, again, the redundant frames, but allowing me to have more space in the center. So in a truly hilarious chain of events, we're now back at this spot where we could now theoretically run the Apollo with it if we wanted, and then slap on a reload booster. And then obviously our last actual booster for us to still hit the boost cap. So while I haven't gone and done that yet, it's something I'm debating doing. I mean, obviously for the huge mass increase, I'd have to rework the entire thing again. I'm planning on just waiting until I get the cockpit fused in order to try and do that. I mean, again, I'm done with the trial for it in PvP, so this hasn't been a priority build for me anyway. I was mostly using it to speed up the easy mission runs for the daily raids. But I mean, I'm also starting to get kind of sick of looking at the same build over and over and slowly iterating on it, especially when I'm not using it a whole lot in PvP. But in any case, I feel like this is probably the sleekest look I've gotten on it thus far. Again, I have the big complaint with having this one piece longer of armor than the actual gun due to it not being able to be pushed back one and overhang the cockpit cabin, but who knows, maybe in a future update they'll end up changing that, although I doubt it. One of the big complaints with having less boosters needed, and I mean, to no small degrees, this is just my desire to quote-unquote be perfect, as far as like I only need 2 purple boosters and 1 blue in order to achieve the maximum effect. Why would I add 4 purple boosters? But there's a significant decrease in the amount of boosting I can actually get off of that. So for instance, running, you know, pretty much the exact same mass but with 4 boosters, you can see a noticeable speed increase with it when you run them. Kicks you up to almost 200 kph. And then obviously they all overheat and cool down together, which is really convenient. For this one, because I'm only using half as many purple boosters, there's not as much of a bonus, so you can actually barely feel the bonus when you're running it. Because the blue one has a different overheat speed and quote-unquote ammo fuel amount, it ends up overheating at a different rate and running out a lot sooner. So if I go the way that PSYS7ORM did, I can fuse that for a decreased overheat speed, and then they're going to be more or less happening at the same time, but there's obviously still the fuel total count discrepancy. And even with the booster at full speed, I can't even go faster than like 150 under ideal circumstance. Now that being said, as a result of being a slower build overall, even while boosting, it's a lot easier to line up shots because you have more time before you get to the builds, but you also end up having a little bit tougher of a time boosting away from stuff because you're no longer able to go double their speed. You're going maybe a third faster best case, and even then a lot of weapons are going to keep you in range for a while, so it's made the whole hitting and running thing a lot more difficult. But this is sort of the current final iteration on it. until they maybe change it again. I'm not super interested in fusing the cabin or the boosters while it's still sort of up in limbo if this is the sort of look, or sorry, if this is the sort of values they're going to use for the perk for a while, or if there's the potential for them to change it and rebalance it again, especially with the prominence with Leviathan cockpit builds. So I'm not really committing to reworking this again, but it's something where I definitely can and might end up doing that. It's just going to be really dependent on there being some sort of changes or finalization, or it just not getting changed for long enough that I feel like, okay, if I invest another dozen hours in this, it's not going to be wasted by an update in 2 months when I'm not even using the build before then anyway, outside of easy raids. So yeah, been quite the process. I mean, it's kind of funny that in a lot of ways, the more work I put into this, the more it ends up looking like PSYS7ORM's Bomber anyway, just as a result of the updates they do. But whatever, interesting try. In any case, certainly one of the more finagly builds and more of the out of my way builds, since I don't normally touch hyper fast builds or rush builds or hit and run builds at all. So it's definitely been interesting looking at doing that. And then of course it also shortens the speed for easy raids quite a bit, because instead of running my plodding along 70 kph build, I'm able to go easily twice that and ram things like tires and steel cradle. So guess we'll see what the future holds, and if there are any more updates to this.